Warren Buffett. Good morning, Warren.
Good morning.
You're arguably the most interviewed CEO in history. Is it your ability to communicate that comes from instinct, or is it something you've learned over the years?
Well, I certainly learned to speak in public at one time. I was terrified of speaking in public when I was in high school. I avoided any class that would require it, and in college. And then I finally signed up for a Dale Carnegie course. When I got out of school, I realized I had to talk to people, and I spent $100. I got this little diploma. I proposed to my wife during the term of the course, so I really got my money's worth there. But in terms of public speaking, I really had to force myself on that. In terms of talking privately, they couldn't stop me from the moment I started in school or anything. I've always liked to talk.
How do you keep up with all the media and information that goes on in our crazy world and in your world of Berkshire Hathaway? What's your media routine?
I just read and read and read. I probably read 5 to 6 hours a day. I don't read as fast now as when I was younger, but I read 5 daily newspapers. I read a fair number of magazines. I read 10Ks. I read annual reports, and I read a lot of other things too. So I've always enjoyed reading. I love reading biographies, for example.
And you process information very quickly.
Well, I have some filters in my mind. So if somebody calls me about an investment in a business or an investment in securities, I usually know in 2 or 3 minutes whether I have an interest, and I don't waste any time with the ones in which I don't have an interest. I always worry a little bit about even appearing rude, because I can tell very, very, very quickly whether it's going to be something that's will lead to something, or whether it's just a half an hour, an hour, or 2 hours of chatter.
When I think you wrote in an annual report, it was in 2009, speaking about the country, about the economy, we are certain, for example, that the economy will be in shambles throughout this year. The problem was that wasn't the complete quote. It led the impression that you were unduly pessimistic about the country. How did you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I wasn't at all pessimistic about the country. In fact, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times in October of 2008, just when the world was kind of falling apart. And I said the world is going to fall apart for a while, but don't worry about it. We're going to come out fine on the other side. And I said, buy stocks. And I've never been pessimistic about the United States. I bought my first stock in the spring of 1942. I was 11, and if you remember, you don't remember. No one watching this will remember. But we were losing the war at that time, and we were getting totally creamed in the South Pacific, and the Philippines fell, and the Death March at Bataan, and all of that sort of thing. It was not until the Battle of Midway, which was a little later, that things started turning around. But I was optimistic on the country then, and I've been optimistic on the country ever since. And incidentally, the Dow Jones average then was 117,000 now. It's no one has ever been a success betting against America since 1776, and they're not going to be a success in the future doing it either.
I know when the Dow hit 1,000, it was a moment of euphoria. Yet, if I'm not mistaken, you plowed in and you even raised more funds. Has the Dow ever felt to you like it was way too frothy?
There were a couple of times when it looked too frothy to me, but that's in 50 years. And I gave a talk in 1999, and it's gotten reprinted in Fortune subsequently, and there have been a couple of times when it really looked to me like people had gotten too excited. But even then, I knew that the country would, any marker that we'd established, we were going to surpass later on, and that continues true to today. I mean, this country's just getting started.
I was reading a Lincoln quote the other day. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And of course, he was talking about what led to the Emancipation Proclamation. When I think about your world, 330,000 people who are employees of Berkshire Hathaway or its subsidiaries.
Well, I sent a message to their managers. Those 330,000 people work for maybe 70 or so CEOs, and in turn work for me. So my job is to have those 70 CEOs sending out the right message. So every 2 years, I write them a very simple letter. It's a page and a half. I don't believe in 200-page manuals, because if you put out a 200-page manual, everybody's looking for loopholes, basically. But page and a half, it's very hard for them to argue about what I'm talking about. So I tell them, that my reputation, Berkshire's reputation, is in their hands. And we've got all the money we need. We'd like to make more money, but we got all the money we need. We don't have a an ounce of reputation beyond what we need, and we can't afford to lose it. So we never will trade reputation away for money. And they're the ones that are the guardians of that, and that I want them to not only do what's legal, obviously, but I want them to judge every action by how it would appear on the front page of their local paper, written by a smart but semi-unfriendly reporter, who really understood it, to be read by their family, their neighbors, their friends, and it has to pass that test as well. And I tell them I don't want anything around the lines. I tell them there's plenty of money to be made in the center of the court, and I'm 84 and my eyes aren't that good anymore. I can't quite see the lines that well. So just keep it in the center of the court, and if they have any questions, call me.
Even the occasional dust-up at Berkshire
there will be.
is big news.
Yeah.
And I'll pick on Solomon only because it's history now,
it's a good
and
one.
a lot of time to reflect on that. When you think about what you went through there, what advice do you have for a CEO who's on the media hot seat because of a similar situation?
Well, there's a couple pieces of advice on that. The first is that when you find out a bad news, correct it, and if it's necessary to report it, then the authorities report it immediately. The big problem with Solomon was not what a fellow named Mosier did, which was to defy the U.S. government, not ever a very good idea, but that could have been handled. But he reported it, he didn't report it. John Merriweather, his supervisor, picked up on it in late April of 1991 and went to the president and the chairman and the chief legal counsel of Solomon and said, here's what this fellow Mosier's been doing. And they all agreed it was wrong. They all agreed it was reportable to the Federal Reserve promptly. And unfortunately, nobody did anything. And then in the middle of May, Mosier went out and did it again. And now you got a terrible problem because you knew the guy was a bad actor a few weeks earlier, and you hadn't reported it, and now that compounded there, and then you're in a real pickle. So when you find bad news, I say get it right, get it fast, get it out, get it over, and get it right is important. There wasn't any question that Mosier had done it there, but to get it fast and get it out, they missed on. And so deal with you're going to get bad news. I mean, I got 330,000 people. I mean, I will guarantee you that probably dozens of them are doing something wrong right now, and I just hope I find out about it early, and the person below me finds out and lets me know if it's bad enough, and that they stop it. So you can't have a city of 330,000 without an occasional crime of some sort. So it's going to happen, and you've got to do something about it fast when it does happen.
There's a media example that hits a little closer to home. You were quoted as being very interested and dramatically changing your opinion on a compensation issue, but that you didn't divulge it to the board. I'm wondering if that was just a misquote or bad fact-checking.
I disagreed with the level of options being authorized, which the Coca-Cola company stated in the proxy material would likely be issued within 4 years. I thought it was excessive. I abstained from voting. I announced my abstention after the vote. I did not want to be leading a proxy contest or anything of the sort. I think the management of Coca-Cola is first class. I think they got some difficult problems to take on, but I think they've got some tremendous assets working for them as well. And I thought that they're very decent people, and I thought if they were reasoned with and talked to, that they might well change things, and they have. I mean, they've dramatically changed that plan so that instead of over 4 years, it'll be over 12 years. Well, that's cutting it by 2/3. The chairman of the compensation committee is a very first-class person, very smart. She picked up on all the points on it, and they made the changes. So the abstention accomplished something very significant for Coca-Cola shareholders. The board of Berkshire wasn't involved with it. I mean, basically, we talked about it afterwards, and they approved of both the abstention and my suggestions to the Coca-Cola board.
There was criticism that you only abstained in the media.
Yeah.
Yours was what I would call the abstention heard round the world. That reflects a lack of understanding of the boardroom on the part of many journalists, does it not?
It really does. I mean, look at what we've accomplished by the abstention. We're the largest shareholder of Coca-Cola. We want to be the largest shareholder of Coca-Cola. We want to be helpful to Coca-Cola. They want to do the right thing. There is no basic conflict at all between us and the Coca-Cola company. In fact, there's admiration on my part for the Coca-Cola management. I thought they made a mistake in doing what they were doing, and the abstention has worked out in terms of vastly changing the plan. And voting no and creating a ruckus would be been a very dumb thing. It would accomplish nothing. They would have dug in their heels. In all likelihood, that's human nature. It might have been more fun for the press, but it wouldn't have accomplished the goal. I did not know they were going to say that they were authorizing those shares to be issued over 4 years. When I read it, I thought it was a mistake. And what should I do? Should I start condemning all these people at Coca-Cola, telling the world they're terrible people? They're not terrible people. What I should do is convey my feelings to them. And I'm not going to vote for it and then talk to them afterwards. I mean, this was shortly before the annual meeting, but I did abstain. And then I talked to them, and now we've got a very sensible plan. And you know, no personal relationships have been damaged.
The journalist's pet peeve, of course, is the banks, as we've been discussing. They see headlines where Bank of America has to pay $18 billion in penalties, and the follow-up is, why isn't anyone going to jail? Why is it that journalists look at business results as a crime to be punished?
Well, I think that there have been individuals do things in business that they should go to jail for, and they have, and sometimes they should, and they haven't gone to jail. But there's two different. There are corporate sins. I mean, take the Solomon situation. The fellow that committed the original act, I think he went to jail for 4 months. I mean, he's the guy that caused our problems. But the second problem was not reporting it. Now, did you send somebody to jail for that or something? I don't think so. You penalize the company big time. I don't think you put them out of business or anything of the sort. We paid a big price for the fact that Moser's actions were not reported to the Fed in a timely manner. It was important that the company pay that fine, and that we acknowledge the fact that that was a very wrong thing to do. You don't go around insulting the United States government on its regulations for selling U.S. bonds. For an action, I think Moser probably should have gone away for a lot longer period, but I may be biased on that. But I don't think other people should have. And you just have to make a determination about when the activity of some individual is criminal. I think, you know, they should be prosecuted. But every time something goes wrong at the corporate level, we've had things go wrong at the corporate level. I will promise you that in the next 5 years, something will happen at Berkshire that is the wrong thing for somebody at the corporation to do. I mean, you know, and we'll correct it, but it's going to happen from time to time. And I don't think I should go to jail if one of our 330,000 people does something they shouldn't do.
But in a sense, we're speaking of two sides of the same coin. The first one was the abstention, where journalists don't understand the boardroom, in a sense, and how it works. They don't participate in it. The second one is a misunderstanding of civil versus criminal law. It's not only a journalist issue, it's a country issue. Is there something we can do to better educate journalists? Should they be taking sabbaticals and working for Berkshire for 6 months or a year?
Wouldn't be a bad idea. You know, it is very tough I quoted Mickey Mantle as saying one time that it's amazing how easy this game is once you get up in the press box. I mean, you know, and there is that problem. Of course, at the Washington Post, they used to say you don't have to be dead to write obituary, so it isn't necessary that you have experience in everything to write about it. But particularly if you're going to be a business journalist or a political journalist, you really should understand business. And going back to our boardroom example, boards are social organizations as well as having business responsibilities. But it's very important to understand how human beings act. And I've been on 19 boards. I mean, I can tell you that most journalists probably, and most Americans, and maybe many many people that write about business, they really don't understand the dynamics within a boardroom, and it's a little hard for journalists to be planted in boardrooms around the country. But I do think that business journalists, they have to understand accounting. You can't write about business without understanding accounting. And I run into a lot of journalists that really don't understand accounting, and that's too bad. That's the language of business, and that's important to understand.
The newsstand is becoming social media in some respects. 1.1 billion, that's the number of visitors Facebook gets per month. 900 million is the number of visitors Google gets per month. So news is seen now through the filter of what our friends think is interesting.
Yeah. Everybody's a reporter.
How does that play out for us?
Well, it's really changed the world big time, and you can see it, in daily newspaper circulation in the United States. I guess there's maybe 1,400 or so daily papers left. There were 1,700 not so long ago, and their numbers are going to go down, and their circulation is going to go down, and their earnings are going to go down. So it is, the print daily newspaper is, it's been in decline for some period. It's going to continue in decline, and people with their computers, with their mobile phones, whatever it is, they get things instantly. Now I can go to ESPN.com and get it play by play. So the world has really changed, and people are, they have gotten used to and demand instant reporting, basically, and that means that they get a lot of stuff before the facts are out. But it means they get the facts very quickly too. They can get their financial news much faster now than when they waited to the next day to see where their stocks had closed.
There's a silver lining you may not be aware of. Social media, the big play right now is Twitter for news organization. Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway alone are 39 characters in a 140-character tweet. But your partner, Charlie Munger, is primarily grunting, and so he only takes up 2 or 3 characters. He's a valuable asset in the social media world.
He's essential. The key to our communication strategy. I still love long-form journalism. You can argue that a 10K is really long-form journalism, and that's how I get my information.
How does Berkshire deal with social media, or do you ignore it?
We pretty much ignore it. If you look at our webpage, for example, we came up with it 20 years ago. It's the same thing. It actually represents what we are. Now, we communicate with our shareholders more than any other company that I know of. I've just gotten through writing the 2014 annual report, 20,000 words, and those are my words. They're not some investor relations department or public relations department. They're not part of a sales document. We fell on our face in one respect last year, and I talk about it. I try to write that as exactly as I would write it to my sisters, assuming that they had virtually all of their net worth in Berkshire. They were interested in it, but they didn't follow it day by day. And they want to know what I think and what went wrong and what's going right and how I think the world will develop and a whole bunch of things. So we want to communicate directly with people, and I really feel that if you want to talk to people honestly about a subject in which they care about, certainly they care about their money, they'll listen. I do not worry about the number of words when I write that report. I worry about telling them the things I'd want to know if our positions were reversed and they were telling me about my investment.
In some respects, you anticipated the social media world. You mentioned earlier in our conversation the page-and-a-half memo that you send to your leadership every 2 years. The operative term today is TLDR, too long, didn't read. And you understood that if things were too long, people wouldn't read it a long time ago. So in some respects, you've seen where social media is going and you anticipated it.
Well, perhaps, but I also want to make it short because there's really only a few fundamental ideas I want to give those managers, and I want to make sure that they don't get lost on page 83 or something of the sort. People usually can't absorb 15 or 20 messages. But in terms of writing about Berkshire or talking about it, I feel we want to give people every bit of information that I would like to receive if I were on the other end.
Do you think in terms of the media we're going through a transitional era and we'll end up in a rational place, or will we see pictures of movie star selfies and cats on the front page of the New York Times?
Well, I don't think we'll see them on the front page of the New York Times, but we'll see them every place else. People, that's why People Magazine became the most profitable magazine maybe in the world, certainly in the United States, by quite a margin. Fortune magazine was still turning out things that I love to read, but it was People that sold. Unfortunately, I think the great majority of people are going to like things very, very brief. They're going to like personalities. But there will be people also that care about more in-depth journalism.
I was reading Robert Redford was quoted that he created Sundance because the studios were doing things for the young kids, Transformers and science fiction, and he wanted a place to do independent movies. Do you think the same thing applies to the media in the examples that you just gave, that there'll be an independent flourishing?
Well, there will be first-class journalism in institutions devoted to that, or publications devoted to that, and there is a big enough market for that. It's not where most of the money will be, and money will drive what the public sees.
Any parting advice before the end of our interview for the journalism student?
I think it's wonderful. If I didn't do what I do in my life, I would want to be a journalist. I mean, I consider myself a journalist to some extent. I assign myself a story. I say, is the Washington Post Company worth $22 a share in 1973? I say, you know, is the BNSF Railroad worth us paying $34 billion? I assign myself the story. It's my working hypothesis that it is, but then I go and look for the facts, and I try not to be selective about the facts that I use as input. So journalism, it's fascinating. I love it. I would say that you should always observe that rule about not letting the hypothesis determine the story. B, you've got to learn. You've got to learn about accounting. You've got to learn about how business works if we're talking about business journalism. And you can always get smarter. And if you do the right kind of a job, you will attract the right kind of sources. I mean, I am a source for certain journalists, and the reason I am is because I admire their work. And you want to have a curiosity about business. You know, there are so many good stories that haven't been written yet, a few of them which I know. And so it is, you couldn't be working in a better area. And there's always going to be business. Business is always going to be important to the body politic as well as be interesting to a lot of readers. And if there are so few that are good, that you're going to stand out if you really work at it.
One last question. You're expecting 40,000 at this year's annual meeting?
I wouldn't be surprised if we top that, yeah.
This is your own social media gathering, you know that. The annual meeting has become a media frenzy, yet you've managed to maintain a common touch. Do you attribute that secretly to your ukulele playing?
No, I think I attribute it to the fact that I promised the crowd I won't play the ukulele. That's why they come.